The disappearance of religious knowledge. A town wakes up and finds the mosque empty. No teacher, no one to correct a mistake in prayer or explain a verse of the Quran. The books are still on the shelves, but the living voice that knew what they meant is gone. The Prophet Muhammad said that before the hour knowledge would be taken away. This is recorded in Sahih Muslim and other major hadith collections. He did not say the books would disappear. He said the people who truly understood them would be removed, one by one. A scholar dies. No one fills the seat. Another scholar grows old and stops teaching. A third is silenced or ignored. The chain that goes back to the Prophet himself gets thinner. When a scholar of Islam dies, it is not like a librarian leaving. It is like a door closing on a room full of light. The hadith says that God does not snatch knowledge away from people by pulling it out of their chests. Instead, he takes the scholars. Death comes for them. And when the last true scholar is gone, people turn to ignorant leaders. These leaders give rulings without knowledge. They speak without understanding, and the people follow them straight into error, thinking they are on the right path. The consequence is not just confusion. It is a community that has lost its immune system. False guides rise easily. Every opinion sounds like truth. No one knows which voice carries the real tradition. The people still pray. They still fast. But the shape of the religion they practice is not the same as the one the Prophet left. Imagine a town where every sick person must now be their own doctor. That is the picture the hadith paints. The books are there. But the illness spreads because no one can read the cure. Frequent and escalating killings. Al-Harj. The Prophet sat with his companions and said a word they did not know. Al-Harj. He asked if they knew what it meant. They said God and his messenger knew best. Then he told them, Al-Harj is killing, but not the killing they already knew, not the battle they understood. Something else. Killing that spreads like a stain. Killing that does not stop. This is recorded in Sahih Muslim. The Prophet did not speak of one war or one crime. He described a condition. In another narration, he said the harj would increase until the killer does not know why he killed, and the one killed does not know why he was killed. That is not a battlefield. That is a society where the reason for blood has disappeared. Only the blood remains. The classical commentators looked at this language and saw something specific. They did not read al-Harj as random street violence or isolated murders. They read it as systemic, widespread, political, whole regions consumed by organized killing where the lines blur between war and crime, between soldier and murderer. The commentary tradition preserved in the collections treats al-Harj as a social collapse expressed through violence. Not a few bad men, a broken order. The killer does not know why. The victim does not know why. Two people destroyed. Neither one understands the reason. The killing becomes so common that it stops needing a story. It just happens. It becomes the background noise of a time near the hour. People die. The killing moves on. No one asks. No one answers. Imagine a marketplace, a street where children used to play. Now people step over what they do not want to name. Trust dies before the first body falls. After that it is only fear. Neighbors stop speaking. Families lock their doors and do not open them. A community that once knew each other by name becomes a collection of closed windows. That is al-Harj, not the bodies. What the bodies do to everyone still standing. The Prophet placed this sign early. Once killing becomes the normal way to settle anything, everything else follows. Knowledge disappears faster. The greedy take more, the corrupt rule easier. A society soaked in blood stops caring about what comes next. Families bolt their doors, markets fall silent, and those with power take what they want. Open immorality and public lewdness. A man and a woman walk through a market together, and no one lowers their gaze. No one turns away. The act that was once hidden behind closed doors now happens in the open, and the people passing by do not even stop. That is the picture the Prophet gave. In hadith collections including the Sunan of Abu Dawud and al-Tirmidhi, the Prophet warned that a time would come when zina, sexual acts outside of marriage, would become public and unashamed. He did not say people would simply sin more in private. He said the sin would walk into the street. It would be seen. It would be known, and no one would stop it. The narrations do not focus on the act itself. They focus on the visibility, the shamelessness. Classical commentators noted that the Prophet singled out a moment when a community loses its reflex to cover what should be covered. The problem is not only what people do, it is that no one blushes anymore. No parent pulls a child away. No elder speaks up. The public square becomes a place where everything is shown and nothing is sacred. And once that line is crossed, something else breaks. Modesty is not just a personal virtue in Islamic teaching. It is a social glue. It protects families. It guards lineages. It keeps private what should stay private. When modesty is stripped from public life, that glue dissolves. Marriages weaken. Children grow up without clear lines between right and wrong. Trust between men and women frays into something transactional. The family, which the Prophet called the strongest fort in a society, begins to crack from the inside. The Prophet described it as a sign near the hour, not because people became imperfect. They were always imperfect. But because they stopped seeing the imperfection as something to hide. They wore it as a badge, and a society that celebrates what it once concealed is a society that has lost the ability to correct itself. The mirror is gone. Only the reflection remains. Competition to build ever taller buildings. A man stands on a plot of empty land. He looks up at the building across the street. Then he tells his builder to go higher, not because he needs more floors, not because his family is growing, because he wants his tower to beat the tower next door. That is the race the Prophet described. In hadith collections including Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, the Prophet spoke of a sign that would appear near the end of time. Barefoot, destitute shepherds, people who once had nothing, would suddenly compete with each other in constructing tall buildings. He did not describe cities growing naturally. He described a contest, a thing people do to prove they are bigger, richer, and more important than the person standing on the next plot of land. Classical commentators noted that the Prophet used a word that points to mutual rivalry. Not building, not construction, competing. It is the same root used for boasting and trying to outdo someone else. The building is not the point. The height is not the point. The point is that your tower is taller than his tower, The point is that people passing by look up and know whose name is on top. The building becomes a monument to pride, glass and steel shaped into a trophy. And once a society starts measuring its worth in floors and spires, something shifts. The money that could feed the hungry goes into the foundation of the tallest tower in the district. The energy that could teach the young goes into designing a lobby that makes visitors feel small. Humility becomes weakness. Simplicity becomes something to hide. The skyline becomes a scoreboard. And the score never stops climbing because someone is always pouring concrete one floor higher than yours. The Prophet placed this sign among the others for a reason. A people who race to build higher are a people who have forgotten what a building is for. Shelter becomes status. Lobbies are designed to make visitors feel small, and the money that could feed the hungry goes into the foundation of the tallest tower in the district. The finished tower casts a shadow so long that no one underneath it can remember why they started building in the first place. Sudden, widespread wealth alongside poverty. A man fills his storehouse until the doors cannot close. Across the street his neighbor cannot afford bread. This is not a famine. This is not a war. The markets are full. The money is moving. It simply moves past some people and pools in the hands of others. That is the picture the Prophet drew. In hadith collections including Sunan al-Tirmidhi and Musnad Ahmad, the Prophet described a time when wealth would overflow. Goods would become plentiful. Trade would expand. But he did not call this a blessing. He placed it among the signs of the hour, because the abundance would arrive alongside something else, hard hearts, tight fists, and a collapse of the duty to share. It is what the narrations say travels with the wealth. The Prophet spoke of a specific kind of rich person in that time, not the generous merchant who builds a well for the poor, not the farmer who leaves part of the harvest for the hungry. He spoke of people who have more than they can spend in a lifetime, and who still feel poor. They count their coins while their neighbors' children sleep without food. They build second homes while families down the road live in one room. The source texts describe this not as prosperity. They describe it as a test that most people fail. And once wealth becomes a thing you keep rather than a thing you circulate, a society splits in two. Those with money buy comfort and distance. They build gates. They hire guards. They stop walking through the same streets as the poor. They stop seeing the poor at all. Meanwhile, those without money grow bitter. They see the lights on in the tall houses. They know the storehouses are full, and they know no one is coming to open the door. Trust between neighbors evaporates. The rich fear the poor resent the rich. The community, which the Prophet said should be like one body, becomes two separate bodies living on the same land, speaking the same language, and sharing nothing else. The Prophet named this as a sign near the end. Not because money is evil, he never said that, but because a society that piles up wealth while people go hungry is a society that has turned its back on the command to give. And when that command dies, the social contract dies with it. They build gates and hire guards. The gates stay shut and the poor are left outside. If this is opening your eyes to what Islamic sources actually say, subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like. That's what makes YouTube show this to more people. Let's keep going. Time feeling shorter and shorter. Lives seeming brief. A father looks at his son and feels like the boy was born last week. The boy is 10 years old. The father cannot tell where the years went. He remembers holding the child in one hand. Now the child reads books and asks questions the father never thought to ask. And the space between those two moments feels like a blink. That is the sign. In hadith collections including Sahih al-Bukhari and Musnad Ahmad, the Prophet said a time would come when a year would feel like a month, and a month would feel like a week, and a week would feel like a day, and a day would feel like the time it takes to light a fire and watch it burn out. He was not describing a change in the sun or the moon. He was describing a change in how people experience time itself. Classical scholars did not say the earth would spin faster. They did not say the hours would shrink on the clock. They said something sharper. They said that blessing would be removed from time itself. Barakah, that quality that makes a small moment feel wide and full, would thin out until a man could live an entire day and accomplish nothing that mattered. He would wake up, move through tasks, answer messages, put out small fires, and fall into bed. And at the end of a year like that, he would look back and see nothing. No big decision, no deep conversation, no book read to the last page, just motion without forward movement. That is what the scholars meant when they said time shortens. Not the clock. The content of a life. And once a whole society lives like this, something breaks that cannot be fixed with a calendar. People stop planting trees whose shade they will never sit under. They stop teaching children skills that take 10 years to master. They stop building institutions meant to outlast their own breath. Everything becomes immediate. The next notification, the next update, the next quick fix. Generational memory, the long chain of knowledge passed from old to young, snaps, because no one has the patience to sit and receive it. And without that chain, a people cannot steer themselves. They drift from one urgent moment to the next, mistaking speed for progress, mistaking busyness for a life. The Prophet named this as one of the signs. When the sense of time collapses, the ability to plan collapses with it. People stop planting trees whose shade they'll never sit under. Stop teaching skills that take a decade to learn, and stop building institutions meant to outlast their breath. And within a generation, those trades and institutions vanish. Increase in earthquakes and recurring disasters. The ground shakes, buildings crack, people run into the street. Then it stops. They rebuild. They sweep the dust away. They tell themselves it was a rare thing, once in a generation. And then the ground shakes again, and again. And the space between one shaking and the next gets shorter and shorter. That is the picture the Prophet drew. In hadith collections, including Sahih Muslim, the Prophet listed an increase in earthquakes among the signs that would appear before the hour. He did not speak of one great earthquake. He did not speak of a single disaster that would swallow a city. He spoke of frequency, many tremors, many disruptions, events that would stop feeling rare and start feeling like a pattern. Reported in Sahih Muslim and echoed in other major collections, the wording points not to one cataclysmic moment, but to a steady drumbeat of the earth moving underfoot. Classical commentators noted that the Arabic wording emphasizes frequency and repetition, not magnitude. He was not describing the biggest earthquake in history. He was describing a time when earthquakes become common enough that people stop being shocked by them. A generation grows up knowing nothing but unstable ground. Children learn earthquake drills the way earlier children learned to ride horses. The shaking becomes part of the background noise of living, and when a disaster becomes normal, something dangerous happens. People stop preparing. They stop asking what it means. They stop looking up. They just shrug and sweep the dust again. And once disasters become frequent, a society bends under the weight. Roads split. Wells go dry. Families pack what they can carry and walk away from homes their grandfathers built. They become refugees in their own land. Crops fail not because the soil is bad, but because the earth will not stay still long enough for anything to take root. Markets close. Supply chains snap. Governments that were already weak, already filled with the corrupt leaders the prophet warned about in another sign, cannot keep up. They cannot rebuild fast enough. They cannot feed everyone. And the pressure builds. Neighbor looks at neighbor. Tribe looks at tribe. Everyone wants to know who has food, who has water, who has a piece of ground that does not shake. The social fabric, already frayed by lost knowledge and public immorality, tears a little more with every tremor. The prophet named this as a sign near the end. Not because the earth had never shaken before, it had, but because the shaking would stop being an exception and start being a season, a thing that comes every year, a thing that people learn to live with instead of a thing that makes them fall to their knees. Whole towns are abandoned as families walk away from the houses their grandfathers built. Corrupt leaders, false claimants, and widespread deception. A man stands before a crowd and speaks about God. He uses beautiful words. He quotes verses from memory. The crowd nods. They trust him. They open their homes to him. They give him their money. They ask him to decide their disputes. And no one in that crowd knows that he never studied under a real teacher. No one knows that he made up his qualifications. No one knows that the chain of knowledge that should connect him back to the prophet broke a generation ago. He is standing in a gap, and the gap was made by the first sign. The prophet did not describe corrupt leaders and false religious guides as a separate problem that happens to appear alongside the loss of knowledge. He described them as the direct replacement. When the true scholars die or stop teaching, when the first sign runs its course, the space does not stay empty. Something fills it. And what fills it are people who look like scholars but are not. They dress like scholars. They speak like scholars. They sit in the same chairs. But the chain is broken. The knowledge is gone. And the people who come to them for guidance do not know the difference. They cannot tell an inheritor of the prophet from a performer who learned to sound like one. That is in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, the image of knowledge being taken away by the death of scholars until no one remains except ignorant leaders who give rulings based on nothing and lead people astray. And once that happens, the damage spreads outward. A false leader does not only mislead himself, he misleads everyone who follows him. A corrupt ruler does not only steal money, he reshapes what an entire society believes is normal. People grow up under his rule thinking that power and truth are the same thing. They stop expecting honesty from anyone in authority. They stop believing that justice is possible. Institutions rot from the inside. Courts become markets. Religious councils become stage shows. And the ground is prepared. Every other sign, the violence, the immorality, the greed, the shaking earth, deepens. But this sign locks it all in place, because when the people who should guide a society out of darkness are themselves part of the darkness, there is no way out, only the end. The prophet named it as a sign. When impostors take the teachers' chairs, society loses its map and the road runs straight into collapse. 8 concrete signs named and recorded in the Hadith. Scholars die and no one replaces them. Killings spread and trust collapses. Shame disappears and families break. Towers rise while hearts shrink. Wealth pours in while spiritual duties are abandoned. A year passes like a month with nothing done. The earth shakes again and people learn to shrug, and impostor leaders step into the empty chairs of true scholars. These are not scattered warnings. They stack. Scholars die and no one replaces them. Killings spread and trust collapses. Shame disappears and families break. Towers rise while hearts shrink. Markets overflow while spiritual duties are abandoned. A year passes and feels like a month with nothing done. The earth shakes again and again while people learn to shrug. And into the gap left by true knowledge walk leaders who look the part but carry nothing real. What the prophet described across these 8 signs is not a myth. It is a sequence, a chain of events that leads a society step by step from stability to collapse, and the sources name every link. If this opened your eyes to something you didn't know about Islam, share it with someone who needs to see it. Like, subscribe if you haven't. See you in the next one.